Hey everyone, Wazoo here, and in this video we're going to go through how to add Docker support to your existing Spring Boot application. Yeah, we've gone through several tutorials on this channel for how to create a new Spring Boot project and work with Docker support, built it right in, but now we're going to be going back to a existing application that we've already been growing on this channel and finally add Docker support to it. We're currently looking at the Spring Boot Black application, and in the last video, we went through the process of creating a release, which just consisted of some minor bug fixes and enhancements. So we're going to be building on the same code base by now adding Docker Compose support. Right now, we just have the H2 database and Timeleaf and everything sort of functioning locally on your desktop as you work with the Spring Boot server, but now we want to containerize it by adding support for Docker. And this gives you the ability to add in a additional database such as MySQL, which is what we're also going to be doing in this video. Okay, so first things first, just make sure you've got the Docker client up and running, Docker desktop client up and running on your computer, whatever kind of platform you're working with. It's just an easy download from docker.io, totally free, and just install it following all the defaults and then just leave it up and running in the background. And so right now you'll see that we're working on the main branch, and I'm going to create a new branch for looking at this Docker work. So we're going to call this git checkout -b for creating a new branch, and then just adding Docker support. Okay, so now we've switched to a new branch called adding Docker support. Okay, so as you can see, we've got our POM XML file open in front of us. So what we're going to be doing is adding some additional library dependencies for working with Docker and MySQL. So first things first, we are going to be removing the H2 database dependency, and then we're going to be adding a dependency for Spring Boot Docker Compose. So the group ID is org.springframework.boot. The artifact ID is spring-boot-docker-compose. We want to restrict it to the runtime scope and leave it as optional true. Next, we want to add the MySQL connector using the group ID of com.mysql, the artifact ID of mysql-connector-j, and we'll leave it on the runtime scope. And then we'll add one additional dependency for working with environment files in both Spring Boot and the Docker container. And this is a project dependency called spring-.env. So this is using the group ID of me.paulschwartz, the artifact ID of spring-.env, and the 4.0.0 release. Okay, and then that's all we need to do. That's all we need to add to our POM XML file. So back in the root of our folder, let's add a new file called .env. It's very similar to the other Spring Boot Docker container videos that we've done. We can use a variable name called mysql_database, and we're going to give our database a name of just Spring Data. And then our mysql_user is going to just be called spring_user. mysql_password will be spring_password. And mysql_root password, which you use to log into the GUI tool that we'll be downloading as well in the Docker container. This will just be Spring Root. Okay, so that's all the changes that we need to make there. Now back in our application properties file of the Spring Boot server, we can get rid of all this, but I'll just comment them out for now. So comment everything out on H2 as well as the H2 console. And I'm going to also comment out this main banner mode. I want to leave, I like the main banner, so let's leave that in there. Okay, so notice that everything here is commented out. You can either remove it, comment it out. I just want to leave it out for now to show you the difference. We'll leave in this Hibernate DDL auto property for now. And then finally, we need to create the compose.yaml file, which is also equivalent to the docker-compose YAML file. So we're going to be using version 3.9. We're going to be having two services for this application, two service containers. So one is going to be the database itself, and the other is just going to be the PHP myadmin, which is what we're going to use for administration for the database. Okay, and then we'll have a volumes section, and then we'll have a networks section because we want things on the same network. And we'll just call this Spring Network Driver Bridge. Okay, so back up here under database, remember to tab in. Tabs are very important in a YAML file. We are going to be using an image of MySQL:/latest. And the restart option will be unless stopped. And for the environment file, we're going to be using the .env file that we created. So .env. And then the environment flags that we're going to pass into the container are MySQL database, which will be the MySQL_database property from the environment. And then MySQL password will be the MySQL password from the .env file. MySQL root password, which is going to be used to adding a default user to the database, which will be the MySQL_root_password. And finally, MySQL_user is just going to be the MySQL_user environment variable. Okay, for our ports, we're going to again use 3306. We'll just leave it on the default MySQL port. Volumes, varlib data, or varlibdb, sorry. And then networks, we are going to be using the Spring network that we just defined. Increase some spacing here. Okay, now let's work on the PHP myadmin. So this service container depends on database. Okay, so this database name matches the same tag that we're using here. So if we called this one DB, then this depends on would also be DB. Okay, but we'll leave it as database. Okay, for an image, we're just going to be using PHP myadmin. Okay, again, we'll restart unless we stop it through the GUI. Our ports are going to be 8081 is going to map internally to port 80 on this container, which is the default port that PHP myadmin runs on. Our env file will just be the .env file that we've got. And our environment flags that will pass into the container are PMA_host database, which again matches the same name as our database service, and the MySQL root password, which is the MySQL root password. And then finally, we'll put it on our network. So networks, Spring network. Okay, this all looks good. Don't forget in the .ignore file to make sure the .env file is not checked into the source code. This is to prevent you from putting in things like, really secret API keys and things like that that are running in the environment. So in order to ensure that new people coming to this repository can still run it and that they know what environment keys they need to create, what I typically do is I create a file called the .env.local, something like that. And then in this file, I just put in a comment like rename or copy this file to .env. And then I put in the same keys that we need to specify in this local file, but obviously not the same values. So I can just leave them empty, populate with your own values. Okay, so now when you come to this project and you see this .env.local file, then you can either copy or rename it to .env and then fill in your own values for database user password and root password. Okay, that's pretty much all we need to get started. Okay, so all that's left to do is launch Docker Compose. So we can do that all we need to do is run it using the Spring Boot dashboard. So we can go in here, which is a VS Code extension that'll hook into running and managing your Spring Boot app, as well as working with Docker if that's available. So let's go ahead and run it. Yep, we want to allow that. Okay, so it's currently pulling down the images, the MySQL and the PHP myadmin images from the Docker Hub. And once that's done, okay, so now you can see that the containers are in a healthy state. So database 1, okay, everything looking good. And there's our Spring Boot server, which is now starting up. Okay, and now everything is listening on port 8080. And hooray, we've got our blog application. All right, so this was a quick video on adding Docker Compose support to an existing Spring Boot application. We've gone ahead and updated the blog application with proper Docker Compose support. And let's quickly take a look at the PHP myadmin interface. So remember that we specified that it was on port 8081. So now we see the login screen. So our username is going to be spring_user and spring_password. Okay, and you'll see we've got 2 default MySQL tables or schemas, and then the one that we created for our app, which is spring_data. So now we've got all these tables for account. We've got an account sequence. We've got our post and post sequence. So we can go into each one, right? And we've got our 2 default entries that were created with the seed data during first time application startup. So we've got our body, our title, created at, updated at timestamps, along with the appropriate account IDs. And we can use this as what similarly we did with the H2 console, where we can drop tables, we can edit rows, we can pretty much do the same things. Okay, and there we have it. That's everything I wanted to show for this video. I thought that was pretty cool. So we added Docker Compose support to our Spring Boot 3 project. We've added the ability to work with .env environment variable files in our project, which we'll make further use of in other features that we want to add to this application. We've also added the ability to work with MySQL and now the MySQL admin tool called PHP myadmin. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked what you saw, be sure to give it a like and subscribe to the channel for notifications on further videos. And I will see you in the next one. If you have a comment or suggestion that you want to see down below, just drop it in the comments and I'll check them out. Have a good day wherever you are, folks, and we'll see you in the next one. Peace.